Right, good morning. Now recently I used a piece of this PVC waste pipe as fork tube spacers, and a few people asked, is it strong enough for the job? Good question. I don't know what kind of crushing force that can take, but I have used it in bikes loads of times. I didn't invent that pastime. It does work. I must have got inspired over it years ago. Someone else did it and I copied it and it works. Look at the forums, loads of people do it. However, the questions inspired me to find out exactly what it can take. An ordinary piece of PVC waste pipe, what kind of crushing force can you put through that? So I thought I'd make a little test. And I've got a piece of steel tubing, that's 35mm inside diameter. That's a piece of 34mm waste tube that fits inside exactly like the spacer on the forks, that's the same. So that's a good test rig. And I've got a piece of solid bar to press down on it with. This represents 34mm diameter, same as the fork spring. Because when the fork spring gets fully compressed and it becomes a solid bar, that's when the real force is going to hit it. So that's a 20-ton press. Let's get a baseline by looking at the bike and seeing what kind of force is expected to take by the motorcycle, and then that's one piece we'll test, and we'll test the other one to absolute destruction and see what it actually can take. Now, as this won't be a scientific test, let's overestimate everything, so at least it's a fair test. First of all, we've got two sets of considerations. We've got the weight of the rider and the bike and the stopping forces involved. Weight of the rider and the bike we can estimate, but the stopping forces we can only guess at. So let's guess big numbers. The bike about 220, the rider about 80, so we've got 300 kilos of dead weight pressing down on the ground. Then we've got the stopping forces. When you brake hard, all of the forces rotate down onto that front wheel. We know that. So let's add, say, 100 kilos of downward force through stopping hard. So an extreme stop is going to potentially push a guess of 400 kilos downwards onto those forks. That's quite a lot of pressure. And of course there's two of them, so it's spread between the two evenly. So 200 kilograms, I think, is a fair estimate for the first test. We'll put it in the test rig, we'll press down on it with 200 kilos, which is probably the most this bike will ever put on those forks, if that, and we'll see if it bears up to that. Right, the dial on my press, the first increment it shows is 2.5 tons. Halfway to that would be 1.25 tons, which is 5 times what we're expecting it to take. So let's see how close we can get to that. Right, now what an incredible result. It's deformed a little bit at the top, it's got a slight bulge in it and a little bulge at the bottom. But apart from that, it is intact. It's not split, there's no bends in it, nothing. It's perfectly serviceable. It's a bit shorter now because if you noticed, when it's inside the tube and I put the slug in, the first 3 lines disappeared once I started pumping. And once it compressed that by about 8mm, it just stopped moving. It refused to move anymore. And then the pressure started to build. Now on the dial, the first increment is 2.5 tons and it went halfway to that. So that just took over 1 ton in weight straight on top of it, once held inside a steel tube to support it. That's incredible and I'm really impressed with that result. So the next thing that's left is to put it back in the jig, back in the steel tube and just keep pumping with the press. I've got 20 tons to play with. Let's see what it takes to destroy it. Okay, now that secondary test, that's completely minced it, and it always would have done. It's a soft material, it's in a tube that's got a bit of free play, and at some point it was always going to squash sideways and fill the tube up and get wedged. And it did at around 2.5 tons. But the first test was the relevant one. That test proved that we can put over a ton of weight downwards on that tube, provided it is supported inside the fork, and it is absolutely safe to go ahead with and use in your bike. So on that basis, I'm safe to use waste pipe in my motorcycles. And the other test is, let's see how much pressure you can put on one of these factory plastic tubes, because that'll be interesting. Okay, final results. The brittle plastic tubing from the factory, it breaks, kind of shatters at about 2.5 tons. Same sort of pressure as this thing collapsed and minced and wedged in the pipe. So they both fail at around 2 tons plus, but they're both also still absolutely fine at just over 1 ton. And that's brilliant. And that's the proof I wanted for myself, so that I know I can use my PVC pipe with no worries whatsoever. But of course, if you're in any doubt, then just use steel, because you know that will never fail. Thanks for watching.